Okay, class, welcome to the U.S. History 202 class. Pretty good class. Some of you had me last semester, and I hope you enjoyed that class. We're still in a pandemic here, folks, so a lot of things are in flux. Rules may change every day. We just don't know about this. But hopefully we're back face-to-face, for at least in part anyway, in a hybrid status. But let's go ahead and get started. I've got a lot of material for you folks today. You'll find in your syllabus, and on Canvas, you'll find your syllabus, and your syllabus will look something like what I have down below here. Like I said, this is U.S. History 2 course, HIS 202. This is not the syllabus exactly for your course. But like I said, yours will change a little bit, but I wanted to show you at least a sample one here. And this is what I have in front of you here. This is put out by the Alabama Community College System out of Montgomery. I did not do this. It tells you a little bit about the course here, and you can read through that at your leisure. I'm not going to spend much time with that. There's a second page to it. And let's move right on here, folks. Third page to that, and then you'll also find a syllabus that I developed. It tells you about the class in general here. If you look up at the top here, we have two sections here of U.S. History 2. We have one section that's Monday, Wednesday from 11 o'clock to 12:15, and another section which is Tuesday, Thursday from 9:30 to 10:45. And so anyway, more on that at a later time here. We don't know if you'll be able to come to class both days out of the week, if you have the Monday and Wednesday or Tuesday and Thursday. As the way it stands right now as I'm preparing this, you'll probably only go to class here for the history class on Monday or on Wednesday, and either on Monday or Wednesday, the day you don't go to class, you'll probably be watching a video like what you're watching right now. Alrighty, so anyway, let me show you what the textbook for the class looks like. Let's see if I can get it to fit under the screen here. And this is what it looks like. It has the astronaut on the front here, American history. Make sure you get volume 2. Dr. Brinkley, who developed this textbook many years ago, I've been through a number of editions in 20-some odd years that I've taught this course anyway, and he died last year, so this will be the last edition under his name, and we've been using this edition for I guess about 6 years now. Anyway, pretty good textbook here. Alright, so anyway, let's get back to our syllabus here. And it tells you down below here the way we do business here, in class or out of class, lectures, discussion, a lot of audio visuals, and you'll find I use many visuals in this class. We have evaluations. The way I see it right now, you're going to have 3 regularly scheduled examinations here, and those will count as 100 points each, and you'll have a final examination, which is a double test grade, 200 points. Interspersed with this, and not on this syllabus here, will be some little quizzes that you'll take at the end of the class period, some class periods anyway, and those of course will also be factored into your grades here. Down below this you can see more information. It tells you about makeup exams, and let me just tell you here folks, makeup examinations it's going to be few and far between. You need to be present there for your examinations here. We've got a lot of this is going online. I don't know whether it's going to remain online, but we just can't have complications within the course here. It tells you other things about the classroom environment, so we're presuming that you will be in class at least one day a week here. So I take this course very seriously, and I expect you to do the same. Down below that, the promptness for the class, you must be on time. Now, even if you're not taking this class on your day, which is face-to-face, you'll still be taking it online, and you need to be in class at that time. I'll be taking attendance with you good folks here, and I'll be taking attendance on several times during the class period. All right, miscellaneous shows you my office hours. It may be changing just a little bit. I don't know about that. And let's see what else we have here. And we also have associated with this your day-by-day activities, and you'll see this in your syllabus. It'll be something similar to this anyway, such as what we'll be doing the first day, which is the introduction, which is what I'm doing to you now, and then we'll also get into a lecture in just a little bit. You'll find 3 scheduled examinations and a final examination that is likewise present there. All right, so anyway, and that's the main objectives for the course here, folks. A little bit different than what we had last semester's class. We talked about colonial America. We mentioned the framing of our Constitution, fighting the Revolutionary War. We went through the French and Indian War before the Revolutionary War. Later we talked about the War of 1812, the Mexican War, turbulent period of times in the 1950s here, Dred Scott decision, which took place a decade prior to that anyway, the American Civil War, and then we also talked about Reconstruction. This time we're going to start out, and we won't get into this today. today, but it will be in the next lecture anyway, with the many Indian wars, Native American wars that we had. We'll likewise get into the Industrial Age, Spanish-American War, progressivism, World War I, a lot of presidents, presidential administrations along the way. Fun period of time with the Roaring '20s. From there, we'll go into the Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War, which will include Korea, Vietnam, the tough periods of time with Richard Nixon here and Jimmy Carter, and a little bit better periods of time with Ronald Reagan, finally going to the first Persian Gulf War, and then to work it back to current history here, folks. So anyway, that's the way. That's kind of the way we do business for this course here, folks. And what I'd like for you to do here, let's go in your textbook, and I'm going to try to find this page very quickly here. And this is chapter 16 in your textbook, and you can use this one in your textbook. I can get it properly positioned here, and we can see America is going west here. America's going west. Look at the ethereal Columbia, if you will, the goddess of progress here, and she is moving to the west. Everything is going to the west here. We have transcontinental railroads, which we'll talk about today. Railroads are moving to the west. Wagon trains are moving to the west. Pioneers are going to the west. Last semester we talked about the gold rush. And notice there stagecoaches are going to the west there. Animals are being pushed to the west, such as the plains bison, the buffalo, and in front of them all we find Native Americans. All right, so anyway, I kind of like that view there in that portrait. So let's go back to our documents camera here, and we'll pick up here. I knock my microphone over here. And as Americans began to go to the west here, folks, and we'll find this was largely due to the gold rush, which began, of course, in 1848 when James Marshall and the foothills of Sierra Nevada mountains discovered a tiny nugget of gold there. And from that forth, it's going to bring people moving to the west in great numbers. We're going to find a different name for this, where Zebulon Pike originally named this area the Great American Desert. We'll now start seeing people refer to it as the Far West, the Wild West, the Great West, and such as that. And much of the population that's there is Native American, and they are going to be moved to the west and steadily westward here. So as people start going to the west, and you'll see this in your textbook here too, my friends, you'll start seeing people that will establish their homes. Just give me a word here for you, good folks. And these individuals are called sodbusters. And I think I'd be better if I let you look at it like this. And there's some textbook photographs you can see here. People in areas like Nebraska, the Great Plains, that build these sod houses. And sod houses such as what you're seeing right here. Here's another sod house here. I think they need to cut the grass on the top of the roof there. And it's an easy structure to make. You just a little back-breaking work here. You get your shovels out, your picks out, and you just dig from the earth here just these squares of sod. And then you actually build your houses from those sods. It's kind of like laying brick here. The roof is constructed in the same way here. And I feel very, very sorry for you folks today anyway, because in a few years, and don't rush into this, but in a few years you're going to be making decisions that you want to spend the rest of your life with a particular person, or I hope you do anyway. And what you're going to find is the most major decision that you'll have in your life is trying to come up with a place in which you can take residence. And I'm talking about a house with that too. And you're going to have to get on bended knees, and unless you have a rich daddy, and get on bended knees and go down to the bank here, and you're going to ask for a loan and to finance that house here. And if you use one of the ideas of the sod houses here, my friends, it will save you a lot of money. You may not be very comfortable there. It's hot in the summer, cold in the winter. I actually had a student whose grandparents lived in a sod house in South Korea. So they are there. But nonetheless here, my friends, you're going to make the biggest decision in your life. Not choosing your partner, but choosing a house here. And choose something that is affordable for you folks. You can't start out with a $250,000 starter house at age 20 years of age. And I'll give you some other fatherly advice here. When you get that loan from the bank, you get it for a 15-year mortgage here, not for the 30-year mortgage. All right, and get that house paid for as quickly as possible, because you'll never be truly comfortable in life until that house is paid for, until you get your children out of college here. So let's go back to our documents camera here, and we'll move right along. We have got a long way to go here, folks. And much of the area, as I said a few minutes ago, that these Americans, so to speak, and I'm talking about Eastern Americans, will travel upon, it's Indian territory. Indian territory. I want to go back to my camera here, and you're probably not familiar with what I'm going to point out to you here, but we have a lot of Indian nations that were present over in the areas here of California. Indian nations here called the Chumash, the Pomo, the Miaidu. Happen to be just a handful of those anyway. The Chinooks. If we go over to this area right through here, we had the Pueblo Indians. They've been long subjugated by the Spanish. Down in this area right through here, of where Arizona is, this is where you find the Apaches. We'll talk about all of these groups the next time we get together. Navajos, not too much on the Navajos. The Comanche Indians are present there. But let's take our attention up here to this area, which is up in this area here, up in the Dakotas area, and that's where you're going to find the Plains Indians. And these Plains Indians, such as the Sioux Indian, the Arapaho Indian, the Cheyenne Indian, these are the true warriors. These are the true warriors. And their entire existence is oriented around one animal, and I think you know what I'm talking about with that animal. Here we go with Indian territory, the Plains Indians, and that is that of the Plains Bison. Plains bison, or most of you probably refer to it as a buffalo. And I'll keep it up here for a second here. Was an endangered species for a considerable period of time for reasons I'll tell you about in the next lecture here. But for these Plains Indians, and these Plains Indians lived in teepees, by the way, and let's see if I can show this to you here, what I'm talking about. These are teepees, such as what you see right here. I think these are Crow Indians, if I remember right, anyway, present in the snow right there. More on that at a later time. But back we go to our Plains Bison here, and for these Plains Indians, their entire existence is oriented around this animal. They use this animal for food. They used it, the hide of the animal, to prepare their shelters, and I'm talking about their teepees. You know what I'm talking about with that anyway. You could use the tendons from the animal for bowstrings, the bones from the animals to make breastplates, breast armors. You could fashion weapons, knives out of it, scrapers out of it anyway. Your foot gear, your moccasins came from this animal. During the winter months, your head covering came from this animal here. The buffalo chips from the waste from the animal could be dried and actually ignited to burn as fuel for your teepees anyway, and everything evolved around this Plains bison. And so for these people, they were nomadic, and they followed their food source. Follow their food source here. Watch the movie, Dances with Wolves. You'll get an idea of what I'm talking about with that. Excellent movie, by the way, here. Alrighty, so one of the problems that these Plains Indians had, they could not always cooperate with each other. They would always fight each other. They normally existed in bands of about 500, something like that. Occasionally we find the bands will be a little bit larger than that, about an equal mix of, if you will, of males and females. The females, did the domestic chores. The warriors here, the males, they did the trading, did the hunting. There no farming that takes place within this group right here. All right, like I mentioned, this is Sioux Indian, Arapaho, and the Cheyenne Indian. All right, now let's leave that topic here, folks. And I want to refresh your memory about the Mexican War. It took place 1846, 1848, and it ended, of course, in 1848 on February the 2nd with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. If you had my course last semester, you know exactly what I'm talking about with that. And Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And so with this, the United States acquired all of the southwestern part of our country. And I'm talking about from Texas all the way up into where California is located here. So much Hispanic influence is found in that area. All right, now one group that did migrate to this area here was that of the Chinese. And many Chinese came to other parts of the world. Hard times had fallen on China during the time frames we're talking about here. So many Chinese actually went to Australia, Hawaii, South America, Latin America. And no kidding, my friends, if you travel down there today, you can still see people with Asian facial features. They're still present in, Guatemala City, are still present in San Juan, Puerto Rico, or San Jose, if you will, in Costa Rica. Now, many of these Chinese that came to our country, they refer to as coolies. They're not slaves, but it's kind of like indentured servants. And for many of these Chinese, that would come. They would organize themselves into Chinatowns, and we find Chinatowns today here in a great number of these, by the way. San Francisco, large population, Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, large Chinatowns present there, and even outside the United States. I saw last summer in Toronto, Canada, a huge Chinatown. It looked like Beijing, and honestly did. London, large Chinatown there. And often these Chinese would organize themselves into kind of gangs, which were called tongs, which they would heavily engage in prostitution and opium trade, and particularly with opium trade. So many Chinese came to North America, particularly that of California, and at first these Chinese were welcomed. They were well received, they were hardworking, they would take jobs that white people wouldn't take, they would work for cheap labor, and you didn't have to pay them as much as you would have to pay a white person that would serve as a labor with that. And so anyway, that was the situation that we had. So many Chinese came in, but eventually there were too many Chinese in California. As many as 200,000 Chinese. This made up 20% of the population in California alone. So many in America started taking offense at the presence of Chinese. So let's go back here, if you will, and let's see what we're going to see here, folks. So by 1882, the United States Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which would ban Chinese from being in the United States, from coming into the United States for a period of 10 years. This is referred to as a Chinese Exclusion Act. And I want you to remember that. You got to know that. So when I ask you in the future what act of Congress would prohibit Chinese from entering into the United States for a period of 10 years, established in 1882, it's a Chinese Exclusion Act. And in 1892, 10 years after, the Chinese Exclusion Act was extended for 10 more years. And in 1902, the Chinese Exclusion Act was extended indefinitely. No more Chinese into the United States. And that would stay in effect here, folks, until 1943, which the Chinese Exclusion Act would be repealed with that. Okay, so anyway, that was a kind of an interesting period of time with the Chinese Exclusion Act. Now, another thing I want to talk to you about here is the Transcontinental Railroad. Last semester, if you remember, we mentioned that to Stephen A. Douglas, his desire to establish a Transcontinental Railroad. And I will tell you right now, let's go back here, that when we look at the Transcontinental Railroad, we already have railroads that extend in the east all the way over here to where Omaha, Nebraska is. So what the Transcontinental Railroad is, it's a railroad that goes from Omaha and crosses the country. So what we actually have, we have two railroads, and let's see here, I'll show this to you in a second. We have one railroad company, which is called the Union Pacific Railroad. Most of the workers for the Union Pacific Railroad were Irish. Now, this railroad company will lay track going in this direction here, going across the country here. And the other railroad company we have is the Central Pacific Railroad, and where it will start is in Sacramento, which is here, and it will lay track going in this direction here. So let me go back to my documents camera, and I'll try to diagram it for you here. We'll bring things together here. Look at it like this, and this is over on the east side here. Here is the east side, and the Union Pacific Railroad with mostly, I didn't write it down for you, Irish workers here building in this direction. And then we had the Central Pacific Railroad, I failed to mention this to you a few minutes ago, and which will have most of their workers as Chinese moving in this direction here. So the two railroad companies are going across the country here to unite with each other. All right, so, and there was a monetary award, by the way, that was offered to the railroad company that constructed the most railroad lines. So I'm going to go back here, folks, and let you use your own imagination here. And which railroad company do you think would lay the most track? This one is going across the Great Plains, which is just tabletop flat, or this railroad company here, which is the Central Pacific, which is moving in this direction here, having to go through the Sierra Nevada mountains, the Rocky Mountains, and so forth. I don't think it takes much to figure this out, which railroad company is going to lay the majority of the track. So let me share a number of photographs with you from this period of time here, folks. I think this was in your textbook, by the way. Now, this is directly after the Civil War, so there were a lot of experienced railroad engineers, and they were well versed in how to construct these huge trestles quite rapidly here. And the thing about it is that when they were constructing the railroads, you had the locomotive pulling these supply cars directly behind the workers, so you never had really logistical shortages because you always had your rail ties and your railroad and your railroad's rails itself always traveling with the workers. So let's get some more here. I've got a bunch of these here, and we'll go through these quickly because we got a lot to do today. Just laying the track here during the early parts. Here, on we go here. This is with the Central Pacific Railroad going through the Sierra Nevada mountains. Mostly Chinese workers here, grossly underpaid. Cold temperatures there, many of the Chinese actually perished. Had as many as 10,000 Chinese working on the Central Pacific Railroad. Look, I got it the wrong way here. And here we go. You don't just go over mountains here, so you have to dynamite these passes in which the rails can be laid through them. And here we go. Other photographs coming from the 1869 period of time here. And let's move on here. Okay, here's what I was talking about here. Constructing the rails, the ties, all provided for you as you're moving across. And like I said before, here we have the logistical support that's coming right in behind, the lane of the track here. Finally getting very close here. I don't see any Chinese in this photograph, so this is obviously going to be the Union Pacific Railroad. Looks like a lot of Irish workers right there. Now, where they're going to meet here is in a place which is called Promontory Point, and Promontory Point, which is Ogden, near Ogden, Utah today. You see the two locomotives. I'm afraid to try to point to these. One of them is here, and one of them is back in this direction here. One is from the Union Pacific, one's from the Central Pacific, and eventually what they will do, they will come nose to nose here. A lot of celebrating here. If you were in the classroom, you could look closely at this photograph. And again, you don't see any Asian people with Asian features. All of these are people that have European features here, and I dare bet that most of these are Irish here. Okay, so we end up here at Promontory Point on the 10th of May in 1869, and finally hammering into place here the Golden Spike. And Golden Spike is still present today. It's at Stanford University, I believe it is, in the historical library. And it was donated, the last one, the Golden Spike here, by Leland Stanford. I think by Mr. Stanford. It looks something like this. This is just a regular railroad spike that I took a can of Krylon paint and painted into place right there. All right, so that gives us a transcontinental railroad, and it certainly will speed the time in going from coast to coast here. All right, now I want to go behind me, folks, and let me show you where this is now. Now, where they're actually going to meet here. They're going to meet up here, and let's see here. Where the Transcontinental Railroad will meet is up here in Promontory Point, and I'll show that name for you in just a second here, and Ogden here. It is not present there today. I will tell you by the end of the century, by 1893, we had 5 transcontinental railroads that actually traversed the United States. So let's go back to the document camera here, and here we go here, folks. And that's the date I was giving to you a few minutes ago. I don't hold you responsible for dates in this class here. But this is 10th of May in 1869. Okay, so let's move right along here, folks. Now, some other things we're going to see. During last semester's class, we talked about territories that were formed. We had the Oregon Territory. You also had the Washington Territory, New Mexico's territory, Utah, and Nebraska. These were all territories. And eventually what they're going to do, develop constitutions and shorten their spaces a little bit by and large, and then apply for statehood. All right, now, where we left off last semester, we had 35 states, and that was West Virginia was the last state. And we're going to see new states to form. So let's work on this for a few seconds here. You're not responsible for these anyway. And let's see here. I'm going to list them out like this first of all, and then I'll go back and show you where these places are. But you probably are well aware of that. In 1864, can you see this? In 1864, our 36th state was Nevada. You don't have to know that. And 2 to 3 years later, 1867, Nebraska became 37th, and 1876, Colorado, and 1899, 4 states were admitted into the Union: North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Washington. You can envision where those are. I don't have to go back to the camera, but to the map behind me. And we also had a 43rd state, which was Idaho in 1880. And moving on here, Wyoming, 1890. That was in 1890, by the way, for both of those. And Utah in 1896. Utah was slow to be admitted into the nation, into the United States, primarily because they practiced polygamy. And the officials from Utah had to convince the United States government that polygamy was no longer practiced in Utah. And of course, today we all know that there is no longer polygamy in Utah. You really believe that here, folks? Of course, I would also offer that there is polygamy in Alabama, and Mississippi, and Georgia, and Tennessee. You know, that's just one of those things, unfortunately. Okay, moving on, just to round this out here, folks. We're going to have a few years before we have another state to be admitted into the Union. But in 1907, Oklahoma. Oklahoma, by the way, was the Indian Territory. Oklahoma did not have a white voting monopoly, so it was a little bit late coming into the Union. Same thing holds true for number 47, number 48, New Mexico, and Arizona, which had large Native American populations. Native Americans are not citizens, however. But those two states will come in 1912. And then finally, we're going to round it out here, folks, our 49th state and 50th state, which will come into the Union, and 1959 being that of Alaska, and shortly after that, we'll have Hawaii. So that brings us to the 50th state, and I would ask you now, if you were in class with me, do you think we'll have a 51st state? And some people say, yeah, maybe Puerto Rico. I don't know. Some people now saying the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. We have certain political parties in our country that are encouraging that wish for that. I don't think it'll happen, but you don't ever know. Okay, now we're also going to see a mining boom to take place. This will occur for almost 50 years, folks. It'll be a mining boom takes place from 1848, and that's when gold was discovered here, all the way up to about 1890, and actually will continue a little bit beyond that. And what's going to happen here is the discovery of a precious metal. Precious metals, I'm talking about primarily that of gold or silver, will bring about a stampede of people to these areas here. Around 1849, I believe it was, gold was discovered at Pikes Peak. 50,000 prospectors immediately descended on that area to capitalize on the gold that was found there. The city of Denver was created literally in the snap of a finger. At Leadville, a huge quantity of silver was found. Washoe District, that's in California, a huge quantity of gold was found. Going back to silver, the Comstock lode, which is located in Virginia City, Nevada, which was the largest silver seam ever discovered here, folks. A 50-foot silver stream. It was a mother lode, so to speak. Okay, let's see what else I have here. And I'm going to show you some photographs in just a second here. But let me cover some of this up so you won't get ahead of me. Anyway, we also had copper, which was a precious metal, too. The Anaconda Copper Mines, which was in Montana. This past summer, I was out in Bisbee, Arizona. The copper mines are still flourishing out in that area. But we'll see a lot of mines, these mining towns, to literally form overnight. And just hordes of men, and I mean literally men, will go to the area. Some women will travel to there, and the women primarily served as prostitutes. I'm sorry, that's just the way that it worked with that. But these mining towns, so let's go back to some of my photography here, showing you a typical mining town. If we were in class now, and I can't see this close enough, but if we were in class face-to-face, and you may be in class face-to-face with me, I'll point out to you the number of breweries, the number of restaurants, and the number of establishments that sell tobacco products here. And it seems like that's not what these men did. They just ate and drank, and they smoked, and they engaged in the prostitution trade with that. Just other towns at that period of time, here showing you once again, just primarily restaurants, saloons of that time. Oh, you've watched enough Gunsmoke, you know what I'm talking about. Another mining town here, another mining town here. And some of these still present here today. Most of these are gone today. You know, when the gold and the silver is all mined out, what happens to the town? And you know quite simply the answer to that. We have a ghost town. All right, other towns that we see here, such as that. Towns that we see here. All right, instant towns. That's what's going to take place here in these mining towns. Okay, so let me move on with this. And sorry to turn away from you like this, but with this, we're going to see, let's go back to this. A lot of, shall we say, outlaws, bandits, bad men, if you will converge upon these cities here. We have professional gamblers, professional gunmen. One place in particular was Dodge City. Another place was Tombstone, Arizona. And let me just show you a couple of interesting individuals. One of my favorite individuals actually fought for the North in the American Civil War is this guy right here. I don't know if you recognize him. He's Wild Bill Hickok. Wild Bill Hickok. And at Dodge City was a marshal there, or sheriff there, and was later murdered. He was shot in the back in a poker game. He was holding aces and eights, by the way, and he was actually murdered. All right, but I like him. My very favorite one, however, is that of Billy the Kid. There he is right here, William Bonney, Billy the Kid. Mostly where he was in New Mexico, and where New Mexico is located here, and particularly a place called Lincoln. I had the opportunity this past summer to go out to Lincoln here and just scour around all the areas here where Billy the Kid operated here. And he was killed by Pat Garrett, by the way. Some of you probably are familiar with that, but I didn't show you. I'm not going to show you a photograph of Pat Garrett. Some of you may be familiar with this guy here, John Wesley Hardin, who was an outlaw. John Wesley Hardin, interesting individual there. But the place is so well known here, folks, is that of Tombstone, Arizona. Tombstone, Arizona, most of you probably be familiar with the shootout at the OK Corral. You've watched the movies here of Tombstone or Wyatt Earp here. And the shootout took place on the 26th of October, 1871. Here's another likeness here that's showing you what the OK Corral appears as today. And this is kind of interesting. I took this photograph this summer when I was traveling out there. Love Arizona and surely love Tombstone. Tombstone was a mining town, by the way. Some of the old mining shafts are still present there today. Town hasn't changed much. The only thing that keeps this town going, honest to goodness here, folks, is that of tourism. It's a fun place to visit here. Like I said, it hasn't changed very much. Dirt streets there. Let's see. I think I have some more pictures here. Photographs showing you what Tombstone looked like. All right, that's a Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace, which is right here. And it is open for beverages, if you will. Also open for food, if you wish to do that. Associated with this was, probably you recognize, Wyatt Earp. Wyatt Earp here, who was a law enforcement official there. He was not the sheriff, not the marshal. That was his brother, Virgil. And if you go there, and you can find a statue there in the background there, that is Wyatt Earp's home, or they will tell you it's Wyatt Earp's home, and a life-size monument there to Wyatt Earp. Gosh, it made me homesick. I wish I could go back right now. Assisting in this foray that took place at the OK Corral, which was actually right outside the OK Corral. It was in the street there at the entrance to the OK Corral. But assisting the Earp brothers, Wyatt and Morgan and Virgil Earp, was Doc Holliday. Doc Holliday, who was actually dying of tuberculosis at that time. He was only about 32 years of age. And his girlfriend, prostitute girlfriend, Big Nose Kate. And the shootout, of course, took place with Tom and Frank McClary, Ike and Billy Clanton and Billy Claiborne in the background. And in fact, if you go to the city today, you'll find all sorts of reenactors walking up and down the boardwalk streets there, dressed as Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday. It's kind of neat. It really is kind of neat there. All right. And anyway, and for the opposing side, Tom and Frank McClary and Billy Clanton were all killed, as it tells you here, murdered in the streets of Tombstone, Arizona. There's Tom McClary, that's present there too. All of the Earp brothers were slightly wounded, with the exception of Wyatt Earp. That's at Boot Hill Cemetery, by the way. And if you want to take the opportunity to go up to Boot Hill Cemetery, this is what it looks like. They'll charge you a couple of bucks to go back there. You need to do it once in a lifetime. It has more than 250 graves. Kind of interesting to go in there, you know, and you can see photographs of the guys I showed you the tombstones of a few minutes ago. Be sure when you're there in Tombstone, take in the old Birdcage Theater. You'll find still, I think it's like 150 bullet holes that are still in the walls, embedded in the bars there at the Birdcage Theater. It's kind of a neat place here. It's the only original building from Tombstone. Tombstone burned on 2 occasions. This is the only one that's still in existence there. So anyway, that's kind of neat here, folks. All right, so let's move on to another topic here before we close out the class period. And I want to address the topic here of Cowboys. And Cowboys, did I write this down for you here? And I want to tell you folks that for the Cowboys, Cowboys is a negative term. It was back in those times, in the time frame we're talking about here, if you're a cowboy, it's like being a hick. It's like being a rube here. It was a negative term. Today we look at it entirely different definition, to the eyes of an entirely different definition. Cowboys are just people who ride horses, you know, but back in those times, it was just a bunch of bad guys here. And I got to tell you, folks, that for the Cowboys of that period of time, 20% of the Cowboys were African Americans. They honestly were. We had such African Americans as Nate Love. Here he is right here. You can see a likeness of Nate Love. They called him Deadwood Dick. I don't know why in the world it would be named, have that nickname. But anyway, 20% of them. Many of the Cowboys that we had at that period of time were actually ex-Confederate cavalrymen too. Ex-Confederates. And anyway, so let me go back to, well, I'll tell you what, I'll do it like this. Here's some photographs of some Cowboys here from that period of time here. A lot of times you had rustlers, these cattle rustlers here associated with them. Typical cowboy scene here. Most of these cowboys, contrary to popular belief, were not very good marksmen. To be a good marksman, and as you probably should well know if you've had any experience with fighting around firearms, you had to practice your skills. And for these cowboys, they didn't do that. And so they were notoriously inaccurate with their weapons, regardless of what Hollywood will lead you to believe with that too. Always a problem out on the plains here. If you have a cowboy that's out alone, it was never an uncommon thing, you know, for the Indians, Native Americans to kill the cowboy and lift the scalp. All right, and here we go. Now another thing we have here, and I'm going to go back to my camera here for a second here, folks, so you kind of keep track with this. And like I said here, we had cattle ranching at that time. Oh, I'm not ready for that here. So let's spend a little bit more time with this. Now, what better place can you have to raise your cattle, to grow the cattle, if you will, raise the cattle, than out in the Great Plains here? You don't have to fence any area. You can let these animals just roam. And what they used for their cattle, they used a hybrid breed. It came from Spanish stock, which was called a longhorn. You know what I'm talking about with this. And then you'd allow these cattle, these longhorns, just to graze in the plains there. And then annually, you would have a roundup. And when you had the roundup, then you would have the long drive. And this long drive, which would move these cattle and move the cattle northward. And the reason you did this, I'll show this to you in a second, you would move these cattle up to a railroad line, such as the Kansas Pacific Railroad, the Atchison, the Topeka, or Santa Fe Railroad. All right, and you would do this on these trail drives. And you had trail drives such as the Chisholm Trail here. You had the Dodge Trail, the Western Trail, the Goodnight Loving Trail. I don't know if I like the sound of that anyway. And you would move the cattle northward. And when you would do so, here's the name of those trails here: Chisholm Trail, Dodge Trail, Goodnight Loving Trail. And you move them northward. What did I do with my here it is. And when you would link up with the railroads there, such as the Kansas Pacific Railroad or the other one here, and that's where you would sell the cattle. And when the cattle would be sold, they would be transported over to meat packing centers for processing in Chicago and places such as that. And that's what these cowboys would do after they've been out on the trail there for maybe 3 or 4 months, you know, driving these cattle northward. They would be paid, and they would be in places like Dodge City here, and just literally in just a matter of a few days, just burn through their money with prostitutes and in gambling. You know, so that was a crazy situation with that too. All right, so what this is going to lead to over a period of time here, folks, is we're going to have other people will come in, such as sheep herders, sheepmen. Other individuals will come in, such as farmers. And then we had the cattle guys. So they all get in competition with each other. Let me try to show you what I'm talking about here. And by this time, we had the development of barbed wire. Around here in Walker County, we call it bob wire, but it was developed in 1881, I believe it was, and now these sheep herders and these farmers could fence off their property. Well, that didn't sit very well with the cattle guys, and so the cattle guys would come in and mask, if you will, here, and with wire cutters and cut those fence lines so that their cattle could graze. And what that creates here are these range wars in which we have sheepmen and farmers against these cattlemen, and it was a rather brutal affair with that here, folks. Alrighty, so anyway, here we'll go back to myself here for a second here. That's a good introductory lecture here for us, folks. You got a sampling of what the course was going to be like, and you got a sampling here of the way I operate here and giving these lectures here. Now, when we return, the next time we get together, I'm going to be spending most of the class period talking to you about these brutal Indian wars that took place from the 1880s to the 1890s. We will finish that before the class period is over, and we will go into the industrialization of America and spend a little bit of time with that. You'll get very familiar with people such as John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie. All righty, thank you for your attention.